My very first teachers and storytellers were the dacoits of Chambal. It was in late 70s when my mother, who worked as a school teacher in the state of Uttar Pradesh, was transferred to a small village near Chambal Valley. Now, Chambal Valley at that time in 70s and 80s was notoriously infamous for being the hideout of dacoits and bandits. My father was an army man at that time and he was shunted from place to place. So as a kid of 4 or 5, I lived with my mother in that village in Chambal. Now the gangs of dacoits would often come to the village to procure supplies, to gather information. And one of them, called Master Ji, he would often bring comic books for all the village kids. Master Ji was a former school teacher turned dacoit and was kind of a Robin Hood figure in that area. He would gather all the village kids and would tell them stories. And soon, I too joined the gang. At first, the villagers, even my mother, was pretty scared. But they soon realized Master Ji was really concerned about the well-being and education of all the village kids. So usually he would gather all the village kids around and tell them stories. And he would make up stories like this. So we would ask him, Master Ji, parrot story, Ravan story, Krishna story, Shiva story, demon story. And he would just like, oh, parrot, tuck. Here comes your parrot story. And we were like, wow. And after one such long story session, I asked him, Master Ji, where do these stories come from? And he smiled at me and patted me and said, they're all around you. They're in the rain, they're in the wind, they're in the stars, they're in the sky, everywhere. You just need to find them, catch them, and they're yours. From then on, I became fascinated with this world of stories, and I kept chasing the wind, the stars, the rain, looking for my stories and ideas. Well, soon, the police started a campaign against the dacoits, and the village turned into a battlefield. My mother hurriedly sent me off to my grandmother's place, and pretty soon I was sent off to a boarding school. The child, tutored by the outlaws of Chambal, was put in a system. Now in the school, I was fortunate enough to have some amazing school teachers who introduced me to the world of books, dramatics, theatre, reading, writing, and movies. The school library became my favorite haunt, and I once again immersed myself into the world of books and stories. However, soon I was saddled with many textbooks, exams, competition, and the race to outshine all my friends and be the best student with the highest scores. So the brain that was supposed to give wings to imagination turned into a large storage device, a memory stick that was supposed to store information and spill out that information in various exams. Well, I scored 100% in all sciences in my board exams. And even after that, I opted to do honors in English literature. It was only after my graduation I realized I was still chasing the rain, the wind and the stars, looking for my stories and ideas. Well, after my graduation, I joined one of the largest English newspapers in New Delhi and became a journalist. Well, it was a mark of honor. After working there for almost 7 years, I realized I was still gathering information and putting out information. Well, it was an important job. Information is an important job. But the seed planted by the dacoits of Chambal had started to sprout. My imagination was running riot. I was going crazy. I had started to write stories. And finally, I left my job and became an outlaw to myself and dropped out of the system. So I moved bag and baggage to Mumbai, the hub of films and entertainment. And for the first few years, I did a whole lot of television shows and television family operas and detective serials and documentaries, and did 3 feature films. It was only after my first book, a thriller, that got published, I realized I was doing mediocre stuff. That none of my stories or ideas were original or authentic. So I started a kind of a soul searching that what is happening to me. And after a lot of soul searching, I came to the conclusion all my thoughts came out from whatever I have learned, studied, observed and assimilated. So all the ideas that come out of my brain are a recycled version of whatever is stored within. So obviously they are not going to be original, they are not going to be authentic, they are going to be second rate. So where is this originality? And I realized the dacoits were right. So I went back to my first love, reading. This time I picked up the greatest of scientists and inventors. After all, they invented things that never existed before. And one of my favorites is Thomas Edison, the one who invented the electric bulb. Now, here was a man who was thrown out of school in second grade. He did odd jobs to survive himself. He used to visit public libraries, sit there, study there for hours, scouring through various books. And this boy goes on to invent the electric bulb in an era where only oil lamps were used. It is said Edison failed more than 10,000 times before he could invent the electric bulb. And then he went on to invent the motion picture camera, the phonograph, and had more than 2,000 patents in his name. The question that haunted me throughout was, what happened to Edison after this repeated failure over 10,000 times that suddenly he found the solution to the electric bulb? In the literary world, the idea of Harry Potter came to J.K. Rowling while she was traveling in a train. And this was at a time when she had hit rock bottom in her life. She was going through utter poverty. How did they manage to invent, create and write things that never existed before? These were your square pegs and round holes. These are the crazies of the world who changed the order of the world. And it is at this point I realized there is a wall that prevented me to go beyond into the dimension of imagination. And the wall was nothing. The wall was my thought process. I was filled with these thoughts that prevented me to go beyond into this entire dimension of imagination. And the dacoits of Chambal were right. The original ideas belong to other dimensions. We as humans, so there is a problem with our thought, and thought creates a wall that prevents you to go into that world where originality, where authentic substance, where imagination is there. In fact, all our stress, all our worries, tension, anxiety, fears, they are nothing but thoughts. Well, by merely observing and watching your thoughts, you have disengaged and disconnected from your thought process. You realize that you are not your thought. Otherwise, most of the time, thoughts possess you. It is like when you're watching a horror film and you see all these spirits possess a person and a person starts to behave in that same manner. Thoughts do exactly the same to us. When a thought overpowers you, you tend to behave, act, react and live as per your thoughts without ever understanding what is happening to you when it's just a thought. But we never seem to understand that it's only a thought. Now it is the very fact that when you realize you are not your thoughts, you have taken a step closer into the dimension of imagination. And it is beyond this wall of thought that you will find original and authentic substance. Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest scientists, said, "My brain is only a receiver In the universe, there exists a core from which we obtain knowledge, inspiration, ideas, creativity, imagination. I have not delved into the secrets of this core, but I know that it exists, Nikola Tesla said. Well, we are not going to dwell into the secrets of the core, but we can start with the assumption that there exists a higher intelligence, much higher than our thought process. Well, mind is the most sophisticated, the most complex, and the most powerful tool we possess. Somehow the mind has enslaved us and created havoc in our lives. But we forget our mind is only a tool, like a hammer, like a scissor. It is to be used to do certain work, to find solutions to problems. But it's like a cell phone. Now when a cell phone pings, we are filled with a sense of anxiety and are drawn to it irresistibly to pick it up and check it. Now imagine your head pinging constantly with thoughts, ping, 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 ping. Now imagine the amount of anxiety we live in throughout the day. And this has created, the thought has created a havoc in our lives. Today, the world is marred with conflicts, wars, terrorism. If you see, the cause behind all of this is hatred, religious fundamentalism, fanaticism, greed, and lust for power. All of these are nothing but a belief or dogma. A system of belief when takes over an individual and gets cemented in its head. One starts behaving, acting as per that belief. Your suicide bombers, your terrorists are a perfect example of that. And all belief is nothing but a thought. A thought has overpowered him. Today, in fact, all mental disorders, something like phobias, obsessions, they are when a thought takes over an individual and an individual never gets to know what is happening to them. So the moment you realize a thought has overpowered you, and it's only a thought occurring in the landscape of your mind, you observe them, you see them, you can move away from your thought, you can disengage from your thought, you can detach from your thought, you stand apart from your thought, you can be more calmer, peaceful, and that is the way to move into the dimension of imagination where originality, authenticity lies. Elon Musk, the founder and creator of PayPal, Tesla Motors, SolarCity, SpaceX, was asked, how come he managed to create such diverse products? He had no answer. He said, counter thinking. He says, to create things that never existed before, you have to go beyond the level of thinking. Because today we are too stuck in thinking, in believing that thinking is the highest faculty. No, thinking is not the highest faculty. There is a higher intelligence from where these great inventors, creators, innovators got their ideas. And that's why you see in US, most cafe and restaurant owners are school dropouts. Many of the innovators dropped out of college. In fact, most of the innovations coming from our country in recent times came from villages and small towns, from completely uneducated and illiterate people, not from technocrats, not from IITians, not from engineering college graduates. So what's happening to all of them? Yes, they encounter a problem, they work towards it, somewhere they are able to move beyond their thought process and find a solution in that higher dimension. Today, it's what we call information age. The world is filled with information. Throughout the day, we are bombarded with information through various devices we carry. Everything seems to be telling us what to do, what not to do, what to think and what not to think. It's like a cup filled up to the brim and overflowing. Now, how come anything new take birth in that? For that, we have to first empty the cup. For that, we have to first declutter your mind. Create some space for originality and authenticity to sprout and flower. For that, you'll have to de-stress yourself. In fact, most corporates today are looking for multitaskers. So they will, all of your IIM graduates and IIT graduates, you run after a multinational corporates and they will say, oh, we look for multitaskers. But let me tell you, multitaskers are nothing but cheap labor. All geniuses focus on doing fewer things, be it Edison, Einstein, Van Gogh, Picasso, Michelangelo, Hitchcock, Steve Jobs. They focus on doing fewer things and gain complete mastery over it. Well, I can only say today, working as a professional writer, I try to work like a scientist. I'm looking to invent a new story, a new set of characters, a new world where I can transport my reader or the audience, where they can suspend their thought process and travel with me in that world. And I'm sure beautiful stories will create a beautiful world. And I know, and I have full faith, each and every one of us has that hidden, elusive light bulb inside of us. We just have to find that bulb. And I know, once we have that, we all will help create a much better world. Thank you.